Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar featuring a practical guide to disaggregated networks where Uniti, EPS Global, and IP Infusion present keys to success. This webinar runs for 45 minutes, and we've reserved time for a Q&A at the end. I'm Kelly LeBlanc, Chief Marketing and Product Officer for IP Infusion based at our headquarters here in Santa Clara, California. Today, I'm joined by two very special guests, Graham Wooden at Uniti and Alan Fagan at EPS Global. I'd like to thank each of them for joining us and allow them to introduce themselves. Graham, can you please introduce yourself and your company and briefly explain what you do and why you're qualified to speak on open networking?
Well, thank you, Kelly, for having us. I'm Graham Wooden. I'm a Senior Director of Engineering here at Uniti Fiber. We are the operating arm of Uniti Group, which we are a REIT. It's a real estate investment trust. We are publicly traded, and we are the second largest independent fiber provider in the United States. Our REIT consists of fiber infrastructure for cell towers, backhaul, wholesale, and we have over 8 million strand miles of fiber all throughout the US. We journey for us today and to explain our disaggregated network solution. It's been a great road. We've learned a lot. There's been a lot of pioneers in front of us that we've been able to examine, and I'll love to talk to you here shortly about all that.
Right. Thank you, Graham. And we've had a technical difficulty with Alan, and we're still waiting for him to join. So you know what I'm going to do? We'll do a little improvisation, and we'll continue on until we have Alan on the call. So today we have a great lineup. We will have Graham, who will share his open networking journey at Uniti. And once we have Alan back online with us, he is the Director of Sales at EPS Global. He will explain about open networking and how it differs from traditional networking. And at the end, we've saved some time for a Q&A. So please ask your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer them. By the end of this webinar, you will learn how open networking can save you 80% reduction on power consumption, increase your network capacity, and future-proof your network. So in doing a quick check, Alan, do we have you with us now?
I think you do. So apologies for that.
Okay, well, can you please introduce yourself? Let us know. Yes, introduce yourself and your company and tell us how you're qualified to give us an update on open networking.
Sure. So apologies, everyone, for the technical glitch. I'm sure we're all used to it at this point. My name is Alan Fagan, and I manage the North American sales team for EPS Global. We're a value-added distributor, and we specialize in open networking solutions. We partner with software providers like IP Infusion and hardware manufacturers like EdgeCore, UV-Space, and Finisar to build solutions for customers like Uniti. We've been active in open networking for almost a decade now, and we have the technical and logistical resources to help customers understand and ultimately to deploy open networking.
All right. Great to have you with us, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's get started. Alan, can you please explain what is open networking and how it differs from traditional networking?
Sure. So the concept of open networking emerged in the early 2000s. And it was in response to the dominance of proprietary networking vendors like Cisco and Juniper. So these vendors controlled the underlying protocols, software, and hardware for networks. And that made it very difficult for organizations to innovate and to switch to new technologies. So in contrast, open networking is an approach to networking that emphasizes open standards, open source software, and commodity hardware. So this means that the underlying protocols, software, and hardware for open networks, they're publicly available and they can be freely developed and used by anyone. So some of the benefits of open networking, increased flexibility. So open networking gives our organization more flexibility to choose the best hardware and software combination for their needs. You know, the software and the hardware, they're not locked together in a monolithic solution, as was the traditional way of doing things. Open networking brings reduced costs, and it can reduce costs by using commodity hardware. You get to choose which hardware supplier to use. And as we all know, choice gives more leverage, right, including on cost. And just because you choose one manufacturer at the start, it doesn't mean that you're locked into that choice. You know, as you add to your network, you can mix and match as features, cost, and availability change. And you will also enjoy substantially reduced licensing and support costs. And I know that Graham is going to talk about that in more detail later, about his experience. And as well as the cost savings, open networking also offers supply chain flexibility. You know, you have multiple suppliers of hardware to choose from. If one switch is not available, you can use a different one. And we really saw the benefit of this during the recent supply chain crunch. You know, we all experienced it through COVID. And we were able to deploy networks in weeks or months, you know, compared to what we were seeing from the traditional vendors. We were seeing 1.5 to 2 year lead times. Another benefit of open networking is faster innovation. So open networking, it leads to faster innovation because anyone can contribute to the development of new technologies. And there are other benefits, such as reductions in power costs, again, that I know that Graham is going to cover as we go through this session. You know, initially, open networking was adopted by the hyperscalers, right? Because they had the resources available to deploy it. You know, if we think of the army of engineers that like an Amazon or a Facebook or a Microsoft have at their disposal, but not everybody has those resources. But now with IP Infusion software, hardware from EdgeCore and Uniti space, and our ability to pull it all together, we're seeing more and more tier 2 and tier 3 operators, you know, reaping the benefits of open networking. And you can too. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Kelly and Graham, and they're going to talk specifically about Uniti's journey from choosing IP Infusion all the way to implementation and the benefits they've seen from this transition.
Thanks a lot, Alan. And as a reminder, everyone, you are welcome to ask Q&As using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So in today's webinar, we're going to be speaking about Uniti's use of IP Infusion's disaggregated networking solution called OCNOS. OCNOS is a network operating system that provides a common software platform that runs on your choice of hardware, including open networking hardware from EdgeCore and Uniti space and more. And EPS Global provides the value-added distribution services for this solution. OCNOS provides end-to-end solutions with the same software. OCNOS use cases include mobile backhaul and access, aggregation and metro networks, routed optical networks, and data center network. Our solutions start at 32 gigabits per second and scale all the way up to 14.4 terabits per second with the same software on open networking hardware. And customers can select their optics of choice, including 400 gig ZR/ZR+ optics. Now, before we learn about Graham's open networking journey at Uniti, I want to introduce the use case that we're speaking about today. Uniti is a publicly traded infrastructure provider with 8 million strands of fiber. IP Infusion and EPS Global have been working with Uniti for some time now to support them along their path to open networking for their next stage of growth. So Uniti is using OCNOS, which runs on a combination of hardware provided by EdgeCore and Uniti space to upgrade and augment its existing network. The systems upgrade is serviced by EPS Global. So in today's webinar, Graham will highlight how network disaggregation is offering advantages, such as reduced Capex and Opex, as well as a reduction in power needs. One example includes 1/6 the power of a typical loaded Cisco ASR 9006 chassis. So without further ado, let's have Graham start the discussion on his open networking journey. Graham, welcome, and can you please share with the audience, why did Uniti choose open networking?
Hey, thanks, Kelly. And thanks, Alan, for giving the brief overview of disaggregated networking. basically, as Alan just stated, COVID was the catalyst of us moving towards, to this new networking topology and design. As we saw our wholesale and our enterprise sales increase and the demand increase, it was pretty evident that our IP backbone, which we stay pretty current and stay ahead of any sort of proactive maintenance, realized that we were going to be falling short soon of 100 gig and 400 gig interfaces. So with that, we started looking at trying to devise a plan of how to stay ahead, especially with supply chain from new manufacturers being delayed, as well as gray market items being the cost increasing about fourfold overnight. It's pretty evident that we needed to kind of look at new technologies. Looking at how our chassis were deployed, our monolithic chassis, 9006s, they were pretty stacked out, and they already had, several 100 gig line cards in them. For us to move to the next generation line card, which would be like a 12 port, that was $60,000 to $80,000 just on the gray market. We knew that while we could probably start with that to stay ahead of any sort of surge, we knew long term that was not going to work out. We have 40 IP backbone nodes, alone carrying traffic throughout the Southeast. Having to do that line card, 3 or 4 times per chassis, the economics was just not going to work out. On top of not just the Capex, but the Opex too, in terms of any sort of licensing. So that's one of the great things about, disaggregated, is having to then separate out your infrastructure. We were able to then start looking at chassis or, routers from UP and having a 5 times fold increase of interfaces available to us at basically 1/3 the cost of a gray market line card that would give us the head that we needed to move. So we were starting to look at how AT&T was doing their disaggregated. They bought Avada, and which isn't that earth shaking. I mean, Avada's been around. People have been running that for a number of years on Linux servers, but we really never took a strong hold in terms of the bigger, larger community until AT&T. So say what you say, say what you will about AT&T, they do have, they were basically helping shape the industry to moving towards this infrastructure. So, we've kind of looked at their case studies, what hardware they were using, what software they're using, and then, came about then looking at IP Infusion, which had tons of benefits to that we saw right away. Them being the extensive development partner for Broadcom on the Strata DNX ASIC chip. We looked at the supportability of across UP space and edge core routers, and then looking at their internal development and external growth. We felt like that was the partner that we needed to go with for the software. Then looking out at how we were going to form that relationship, EPS really stepped in and helped us, get in touch with the right people at UP Space and EdgeCore for our hardware type questions, and then developing the relationship with the IP Infusion to help us with the software end. Our IP backbone is completely separate network from our Ethernet, so there was some considerations that we needed to take place. We handled things a little bit differently than our MPLS Ethernet network does. So, we had a series of questions and use cases that were not readily defined or readily available for us to use. So we took a little bit extra time going through that process and, formed what we believe a pretty strong relationship with IP Infusion, UP Space, and EdgeCore with the help of EPS.
Wow, you've done a lot of research and a lot of consideration into this deployment, working with both of us, both of our companies. Can you describe the experience of working with IP Infusion and EPS Global?
Absolutely. So I'll start with EPS Global. You know, being directly introduced with EPS right away, I knew that they were going to be a solid partner. You just have that sense when you talk to like our account team and not only our account manager, but also this like the service and sales engineering team. You just knew right away that I had a team that can answer my questions, and if they weren't able to answer them, that they will be able to get the answers right away. I always felt like I was taken care of, didn't have any sort of hesitation or anything that was left undone on their end. I felt like they really stepped up and wanted our business. With working with EPS too, since we are a larger customer and have a larger footprint, there's staging warehouses throughout the United States that we started to work with EPS on getting the hardware that we're using more readily available for any sort of RMAs. And luckily, to this day, knock on wood, there hasn't been any hardware failures, but I know that EPS will have hardware stage in RMA status for us to be shipped out if need be.
So. Yeah, and I think support is probably a key topic. With open networking, support is one of the leading topics where we have to reduce the barrier of entry to make a smooth transition, a very comfortable transition. So before we deep dive into all of the benefits in terms of Capex and Opex and power savings, I'd like to address the support topic first and foremost.
Yeah, so, and that's a great question, Kelly. That was initially our initial, not holdback, but item that we wanted to address quickly was, we're used to traditional support methods from larger organizations, how we were going to receive the support from IP Infusion. So, luckily here at Uniti, we have a pretty large lab. It's about 40 racks, close to 40 racks. And each of those racks encompasses equipment and of hardware and software that we run out in the field. So anything that we run out in the field, we're able to stage it properly in our lab first. We were able to, with help of IP Infusion, we were able to stage a lot of our gear in the lab and run through lots of test cases of how we were deploying out individual markets, how we're deploying out through the backbone and out to our edges, and then recreating various test scenarios. And while we did uncover a few little bugs, IP Infusion was quote unquote Johnny on the spot of getting them fixed, getting any issues quickly handled. And it was reassuring that for a company our size, that IP Infusion was right there, ready to support.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point that you made there, Kelly, about support being a big issue. For us as EPS Global out evangelizing open networking, it is one of the biggest concerns that customers have. Customers who are not familiar with open networking, will they receive the levels of support that they're used to? In our experience with customers where we've deployed, most of the time they actually find the support better. They have better access to the technical resources within like an IP Infusion than they would with a traditional vendor. And typically they're pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, thank you both. Now that we've addressed that, let us call it the barrier to entry, I think it's a good time to deep dive into the topics at hand and about these benefits. These have been some pretty bold claims. So Graham, let's deep dive into the Capex and Opex savings topic. So how were you able to get these sort of metrics?
Yeah, so, obviously when you look at our network and our topology, we're running hardware that's a little bit more expensive to operate, a little bit more power consumption, compared to a smaller operator. And that's not to say that there's any sort of differences of behavior, that's just how our structure is. When we started looking at how to keep up with our demand and have the capacity needed for our wholesale and enterprise, looking at our chassis, power was not really a consideration. We operate in dozens and dozens of central offices where power is kind of unregulated. And we would just kind of succumb to realizing that, some things will be regulated federally and some things weren't, and power isn't. And we just kind of succumb to that's how it's going to be. So our main focus was, driving the Capex savings first, driving the aspect of, okay, I'm going to spend $60,000 on this 8-port line card, 100 gig line card that is going to continue just pushing the ceiling of this monolithic chassis. What's going to happen after that? I already went through a couple of cases where we've had an 8-port line card, and then in like a month or two, probably about 2 months, we had to come back and put in a 12-port card. And there was no more slots in that chassis to accommodate. So we knew that we were coming to a crunch. Now, we could obviously put in a bigger slot chassis, but that would probably also demand more power. So going back through, looking at, like, for example, the UFI space 56DX, which is 48 100 gigs and 8 400 gigs, looking at the port density of that compared to the 8-port line cards that we were traditionally deploying, it was like a third savings. We went from $60,000 for a one line card to 20 for the router, and we got five times the number of ports. The Opex savings of all that too, when you look at the software and licensing, it was significantly cheaper than to traditional vendors that we were using, significantly cheaper. Much more that after we started going through it, realized that, shoot, we have a lot more money at our disposal now. We didn't have to blow our budget. We're able to use this money now to further grow other parts of the network. The power savings was one that came afterwards. Like I mentioned earlier, the power, we just kind of realized, well, power is power and it will pay for what. But then we started realizing that, these chassis are monolithic chassis. We're pulling up to like 56, 60 amps of DC power. Then going down to about 6 to 7 amps of power, that's a huge reduction in cost for us, much more than I initially realized. And then furthermore, staying to our ESG, our environmental goals, being able to go to stay, have less power and less, more, kind of more stay more green than we were kind of projecting. That also had the benefits of as well. Not so much, monetary wise, but just, economic and social as well. So there was tons of benefits going from, reducing our power load from a per chassis. Now, keep in mind, at these locations, we deploy 2 chassis. We have a separation of degrees. We have a northeast on one chassis and our southwest on another chassis. So we were drawing probably close to 120 amps of DC power just to supply the backbone, our IP backbone, that is, where then I can go basically down to about 14 amps between the 2 chassis. So 120 amps of power down to 14 amps of power. So huge savings, not just our monthly bill to the central offices operators or our data centers, that is as well, but also, being able to be more stewards of our community.
That's excellent. I think I would say, being a publicly traded company, you have many social responsibilities, and this power consumption savings would absolutely address those requirements.
Absolutely, Kelly. It does. And, there's other parts of Uniti as well that our ESG is very important. It's just that on the IP backbone side, we never really realized how much important it will be, just because we just, succumb to the feeling that we would have to run these big, that we would have to run these big routers forever. So it was a blessing in disguise that we were able to move to smaller chassis that with more ports and have the same software capabilities that we're running before. So it was a win across the board.
Wow, this is an incredible story. So with all stories, every story has its benefits and its lessons learned. And so,
Yeah.
This has been a journey for you. And so I would like to talk a little bit about your lessons learned along this journey, and anything you could do to share with the community about these lessons.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I will quote the immortal words of Olivia Newton-John, and which is, let's get physical. So the biggest item for lessons learned for us, it wasn't software. It wasn't, the differences in the CLI. It wasn't, any perceived notions of protocol changes. All that was straight up easy. Switching from one vendor to Oknos, it was much easier than I anticipated. What I didn't really anticipate was the physical changes. So being that our line cards were running, for example, our line cards were running optics that ran SC connectors. These new chassis are running QSFPs that have LC connectors. So as we were going through in our first deployment, we had the physical dimensions of the box already kind of spec'd out in the rack, and power cables ran. But then it came pretty evident very quickly that our SC connectors, our jumpers that we ran previously for the old chassis, were not going to be able to be used on the new chassis. The change from SC to LC, those connectors don't interchange. So we quickly had to go through and redo our cabling to have LC ends. So yeah, someone will look at this and go, well, shoot, Graham, you should have caught that before. I guess we're so hyper focused on the physical size changes of the chassis, right? Going from a 14 RU box to a 2 RU box, and rerunning the DC power because the lugs are a little bit different. But we just kind of just thought, okay, well, we're going to move from this 100 gig optic on this old chassis to the new optic, and then realizing, oh shoot, we're going from SC connectors to LC. So the lessons learned is really at the physical layer, is to review all your physical plant rack space before you go and deploy. That way you're not caught off guard at the 11th hour when you're trying to do a inside a maintenance window, and then realize that oh shoot, you got to spend another 30-40 minutes running cables when that could have been easier or be done before.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit as well, Kelly, about some of the lessons that we learned as EPS, from the Unity experience. And Graham has talked quite a bit about the power savings, like the really dramatic power savings. And we were aware that there were power savings, but I think seeing them so big was a lesson learned for us. But I think it's a common thread that we see with the customers that we have who have implemented open networking. They may implement it because of lead time. They may implement it because of cost. But once they have it implemented, they find all these other benefits that they were not aware of. And there's no going back. There's no going back to the old way once they've done it. But I think, yeah, the dramatic power piece was a real lesson for us.
That's good feedback as well, Alan. Thank you. And thank you for deep diving on these lessons learned. I think there's a couple other areas where the audience could benefit, because there's always next steps in a journey. And so, Graham, could you share with the community what could be the next steps in your journey?
Yeah, so the next steps in our journey right now, and as I kind of mentioned earlier, on the backbone locations where we deploy, our two nodes, is really the reason why we do the two nodes is to separate our failure domain, right? We don't want to have all of our eggs in one basket per se. So in terms of our degrees for our waves, our wavelengths, and to take a step back, our IP backbone is completely optical. We don't ride, the IP itself does not ride a switched network in between our nodes. Is completely optical. So when we think about our starting at the physical layer, again, Livy knew John, you gotta, I always gotta quote her somehow, somewhere. You gotta look at how you're gonna separate, in case of a failure, what areas are gonna be impacted. So we started early on in our evolution is that we were going to standardize on 2 backbone nodes to separate degrees. So if we're gonna have a backbone node outage, it will not take down the whole market or take down any sort of traffic coming through it. We would have a second node. So when we look at how to, our next steps was, okay, well, we know we've been pretty comfortable now with IP Infusion and the UFI space on the Qumran 2 boxes, now with the support of Jericho 2 coming out, and that, or is now out already, we're looking at how to further separate and not have all of our eggs in one particular vendor. So we're looking at the edge core, and this and the which we already do have some edge core, but in terms of the backbone nodes, looking at more of the Jericho 2 ASIC. So if there was any sort of issue between the Qumran or the Jericho 2, we would not have the full backbone done or offline. So the other considerations too that we've been looking at for our next steps is, obviously the backbone routers are one piece of the pie. There are other components that run our IP. We have our distribution routers in the market. Those are the routers that face the customer networks. Those are the routers that are actually doing BGP with customer, or doing BGP with a cache server, or some of our external facing IX connections. So we've been looking at those routers being changed or being able to start taking advantage of those. Those are traditionally been like 9904 or 9906 type chassis. So now we're going to start looking at replacing those with a UFI space or edge core router, as well as our other type of routers that function to help deliver the service, like route reflectors and special services edge type routers. We're looking at changing those out too. So it's just not, while this evolution has started with us, has been just the backbone nodes, but to now encompass the whole IP service delivery for Uniti, which is over 100 routers, we're starting to encompass those changes as well.
Well, that's excellent. This is what we like to call here at IP Infusion total network disaggregation. So you're disaggregating everything, the hardware, the chipset, the optics. It's very, very interesting, this story, and you're sharing these next steps. And Alan, I know you've been very involved in the next steps journey as well, so I'd like to get your take.
Yeah, I think, for us, the next step is really, it begins today with this event and getting the word out there. I'm very proud of the impact that we've had on Uniti and how we've helped them. I'm very proud of the relationship that we have with IP Infusion and with the hardware manufacturers that we work with. I'm also very proud of my team, the sales team that we have involved with Graham and Uniti, Bob Crane, and then George Sy, who's our technical director. And I don't think there's anyone out there with more knowledge of this marketplace than George. I really feel we have the tools in place, right? We have the software, we have the hardware. The biggest job that we have now is evangelizing, getting the word out there and having people understand the benefits that they can reap from implementing this. And Graham is a tremendous example of that. We're all aware of the need to get broadband connectivity out there everywhere it's required. And we feel that what we have is a way for that to be done in an economical way and in a very powerful way that will work. And we got to just keep getting the word out there.
Excellent. So, one of the things I think could be really helpful, Graham, is if you could summarize the one key criteria that led you to select IP Infusion, EPS Global, and open networking.
Sure. Yeah. So for IP Infusion, the one criteria that just really stuck out and kind of resonated with me was the previous licensing agreements that IP Infusion had with other vendors in the past with its previous license-only operating system, which I've used in other vendors as well. So for example, like F5 or Fujitsu, those are vendors I've been using for years, not realizing that until this journey started, that those operating systems were components licensed by IP Infusion. So IP Infusion in turn has been running pretty strong since the early 2000s, maybe even a little bit before, with their components being licensed out to other vendors. So it was just a reminder that IP Infusion was in this for the long haul. They weren't someone that just started up, in the late 2000s or 2010s or whatever. That might be for Oknos side, but the actual, the components that make up Oknos have been around and supported and developed by IP Infusion for since 2000. Again, running on vendors that we've been using in other areas for years. So I knew that I knew that I was using a software that was going to have that was going to be part of our now life cycle for years to come.
Excellent. Yes, I thought maybe you would bring it back to Olivia Newton-John, but
Well,
I think that's been a theme throughout this entire interview.
yeah.
Okay, Alan, let's go back to Alan. We'll do a couple other rounds and open it up to Q&A. Alan, can you share some advice on how to begin a transition to open networking?
Yeah, I think the most important piece of advice that I would give is to find the right partner to work with, right? And I will say that I believe that EPS Global are the right partner. I think Graham would back me up on that one as well. And the reason that I say that is that we have the technical knowledge, we have technical people on our team, and we have the relationships. We have the software relationships, we have the hardware relationships, and the ability to pull all those together as well. And also, where we don't have the answers, we have the relationships with IP Infusion. We have the relationships with EdgeCore, with UPSpace, and we allow our customers to leverage those relationships as well. We do the introductions directly, so Graham and his peers can talk directly to the hardware and the software people and figure out solutions. We're all about figuring out the solutions. I think, if I think of the customers, the potential customers out there, one of the fears that they have is having to try and navigate this landscape on their own. What's the right software? What's the right hardware that goes with that? We can help in that. And I think that's a really key thing. Find the right partner, work with them, and we can make this easy.
Excellent. Graham, how about from your perspective, some advice on how to begin a transition to open networking for those who are maybe still on the fence or just getting started?
Yeah. So, early on in my IT career, I've been in IT for 26 years. I started off working for a very small dial-up ISP in 1997, and now here I am in 2023 working for a very large ISP. The one thing that I have kind of learned early on in my career, and it's just a constant reminder in everything that I kind of try to do new, is I try to apply what's called the KISS method. And that's called keep it stupid simple. You don't want to overthink and try to overanalyze because you just drown in your own thoughts and over complicating. I always try to look at things of a very simplistic approach. Now, granted, the end result may be complicated, but at the initial review is you want to keep it simple. You want to keep it stupid simple is what we apply for the KISS. So for the folks that are looking at getting rid of their monolithic type chassis or getting away from a vendor that they're using today to like IP Infusion or a disaggregated operating system, I would look at just the very basic levels of what protocols you're using, what physical aspects you're looking to achieve. Are you looking to achieve a size reduction? You're looking to reduce number of interfaces. Maybe you need to get rid of a bunch of 1 gig or 10 gig interfaces and go to a 100 gig or 400 gig. So you want to start looking at stuff like that. I would not be worrying too much about the protocol or what the CLI looks like. You know, we initially thought that we would have some challenges in that, and come to find out, no, the CLI is very comfortable, just like what we use today or have previously been using. The protocols are all there that we traditionally have been using. So it was really, we were kind of initially worried about the wrong things. And having folks like EPS and IP Infusion there to kind of help us shape the conversation of, hey, this is what we need to do, you know, was very helpful. So we applied that along with the KISS method. And I think that, you know, we had a pretty successful deployment thus far. And I'm hoping that folks that walk away from today's webinar can do the same and have the same results.
That's great advice. Thank you, Graham. All right. So for the audience, it's now time for our Q&A. And we've reserved a couple of minutes for Q&A at the end. So if you haven't asked your question yet, please enter that in the button at the bottom of your screen. And I see one that's come in. It actually continues on the theme that Graham was just talking about. So I'm going to have this one for Graham. The question is, how did Uniti operationalize its Ocnos devices? It says, assume the new equipment got added to an existing NMS OSS environment. Is the integration based on CLI, NetConf, or even SNMP?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So, you know, we did have a pretty extensive SNMP deployment that was doing some monitoring. You know, it wasn't so much like a streaming telemetry, but it was more or less like up, down, or interface counters or errors. So those actually transitioned over perfectly. The MIB is just a standard MIB. It didn't have any complicated. We had to go and, you know, rewrite a bunch of MIB items. SNMP transitioned perfectly. We started to do some streaming telemetry, and so that's been pretty cool. That's one that we've not done a whole lot of prior. That's been somewhat relatively new for us. And then in terms of the configuration, you know, we have started to use NetConf and Ansible, primarily more NetConf, but a lot of our stuff is still done on CLI. On the IP backbone, it is not as automated as our other routers are in terms of like customer circuit deployments and stuff. So we still have a lot of human interaction where we're able to make a lot of changes. So getting comfortable with the CLI was not a daunting task for us. And even the changes from NetConf from the previous vendor over was pretty straightforward as well.
Hey, excellent. I see there have been a lot of Q&As throughout this webinar, and I see that most of them have been answered back and forth between the teams.
Okay.
All right. So I think it seems at this point they've all been answered. So last chance for anyone to ask a question, if you have one.
I'm looking to throw an Olivia Newton-John answer in there somewhere.
Yeah, Olivia Newton-John and KISS, right?
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
And it's perfect timing because we are now at the top of our webinar hour. Okay. So Graham, Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great discussion. And awesome. I want to thank everyone for joining our webinar, for all of the great questions and spending the time with us. We look forward to seeing you again very soon. And until next time.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Bye now.